Welcome back to Beyond the Uniform. I'm Justin Nassiri, and each week I meet with military veterans to learn about their civilian career, what they do, how they got there, and advice for any other veteran who's seeking to do the same. Today is episode number 190 with Jimmy Sopko.
And so he was building out a small customer support team. Pinterest was about 70 people. Well, when I started talking to them, there were about 40, 50 people. Mm-hmm. And the customer support team was 4 people maybe. And so I applied to do customer support tickets. That's what I applied to do. Knowing that if it was a fast-growing company and I did well, I can create my own opportunities for myself.
Well, I am trying out a new experience, and I would love your feedback on it. I am rebroadcasting an episode, and today's episode is the 6th episode that I ever recorded for Beyond the Uniform years ago, and it stuck with me. I have referenced it on the show several times, but I was thinking that, we've got almost 200 episodes now of these stories, and I know it can be overwhelming to dig through all of them and figure out which ones to listen to. And so I wanted to start using, I'm generally publishing on Monday new episodes. I wanted to experiment on Thursdays with rebroadcasting a couple episodes, and I'll do this for a couple weeks here and then see what the feedback is and determine what to do after that. But I have not listened to this interview since I did it literally 2 years ago, and it stuck with me vividly. And one of the things I most appreciate about Jimmy's story is, first of all, he went directly from the military, from the Navy, into technology. He didn't go to school first. He just dove right in. But I admire Jimmy so much because he went from being a lieutenant in the Navy, making, I'm guessing, at least $100,000, probably $125,000. I forget exactly what it is. But he went from that and took an entry-level position at Pinterest, which is a great company. But I'm also guessing that his salary was probably $40,000 or something along there, maybe $60,000 tops. But it's like, it's a dramatic reduction in salary, dramatic reduction in title, and having peers that were 5 years younger than him. And I love that thought for those of you who want to go further away from the adjacent fields of the military, maybe government contracting, things like that are more directly related to what you did in the military. For those of you that want to get further away, it often entails a step back. And Jimmy's a great example of that, someone who's willing to take a step back and where it paid off in the long run. So let me know what you think about these rebroadcasts. This episode is so old it didn't even have any cool theme music, but we're going to dive into this interview. Let me know what you think, and if you've listened to this already, you get a merit badge for having gone that deep in the archive. But this is my conversation with Jimmy Sopko. I appreciate your time on this. I know things are busy, but I'm really excited to hear your perspective and juxtapose it with Shauna's as well.
Yeah, definitely. It's super important.
Yeah. Well, just a quick recap on your background. So, Naval Academy 2005, studied mathematics. You were the captain of the Navy Lightweight Crew Team.
Yeah.
And crew, it seems like, has been a trend in your background since then.
Yes.
You went straight from the Naval Academy to the postgraduate school where you got your master's in applied mathematics. You were also a W. Randolph Churchill Award for Excellence recipient. From there, you went to Everett, Washington, surface warfare from 2005 to 2010. Concurrently, you got the national team member of U.S. rowing team for almost 4 years, and you got a silver medal in the 2009 World Rowing Championships, which is impressive to think of how you were able to do SWO and keep up the athletic side of things.
Yeah.
And then when you got out, you did a 3-month stint over at Johns Hopkins, their Applied Physics Laboratory, and then made the jump straight into Pinterest as one of their community operations manager and now the manager of growth sales. And that's really why I was excited to talk to you, of just punching pretty high weight class, jumping straight into a company like Pinterest.
Yeah. So I got really lucky. When I got out of the Navy in 2010, I actually trained full-time for 2 years with the U.S. rowing team.
Okay.
So I was technically unemployed, which is fun. And my wife, Shauna, who you've spoken with, supported me through that. And then it was my turn to get a job in 2012 while she went to business school. And, it was hard because I didn't know what I wanted to do. Just like a lot of vets, I think that you have a certain skill set, whether it's driving a ship or leading teams, and it's hard to tangibly put those things onto a resume. And rowing was the same thing. Like I could wake up, I could be disciplined and work really hard towards a goal, but it was difficult for people to understand that experience. The advice I got was to reach out to a lot of veterans who had successfully transitioned in various industries and ask them what they did and why they did it, and what they liked and what they didn't like, what skills from the military did they use that allowed them to succeed in their current industry or role. And through that, I, one, built a pretty solid network of people who could help me get my foot in the door somewhere. And two, I learned what was important to me, which I think was like the biggest benefit from that experience.
How did you go about that? Was this mostly LinkedIn and guessing at email addresses, or how did you kind of penetrate through that?
So I took I did a 3-pronged approach to getting a job. I went through the typical Lucas Group JO placement. I applied online and I did my own networking. On the networking side, really good advice I got was to use the iSaber-D network, which is the Surfers Academy's equivalent of LinkedIn.
Okay.
And so you can actually apply through the Alumni Association, through the USNA Alumni Association. And on there's a database full of every Surfers Academy graduate who is a member of their association, and their job and their phone number and their email. And not all of it is up to date, but that was my primary source of leads, if you will. And then I just emailed them. And I got really lucky. I knew I was moving to the Bay Area, and I got a few good hits off of it, mostly from West Pointers, actually, which is interesting.
That's shameful for the Naval Academy.
Yeah, it was, but it was helpful. I got to touch people that way, and I had some mentors of mine who knew people and introduced me to various people as well.
How did you even know where to reach out? I mean, was it an industry approach where you're thinking maybe finance, maybe consulting, or how did you even start to parse the civilian world?
So I broke it down into, one, I had no idea what I wanted to do, so I kind of went a shotgun approach and tried to pick somebody from each industry that I thought I could work in, right? So management consulting, investment banking, technology, all the way to medical device sales, right? For me, I knew that I felt like I needed a veteran in an organization to, I think 2 reasons. One, to vouch for me because they understood my background, and 2, I think it was a little bit of it gave me confidence that I could work in that environment because I didn't know anything about them, and if a veteran was already there succeeding, then there was a chance I could as well.
That's great. It's not like you're the trailblazer. There's someone at least that you could go through and say, look, this has been done before. It's smart.
Yeah.
Backing up, at what point did you know you were going to leave the military? How did you approach that decision of whether to stay in or get out?
Yeah, good question. So I decided, I rowed in college. I rowed in high school and college, and at the Naval Academy I was really lucky to be in a lightweight rowing team, and I loved it. My best friends from the Naval Academy are on the team, and we had a good team. It was solid, and I always had this dream of rowing on the national team. That was put on pause when I had to go serve, and so in 2008 I watched the Olympics while I was on deployment, and the U.S. lightweight rowing team did not do well at the Olympics. And I think that really motivated me to try and go for it. And so I decided right then that I was going to try to work with my captain so I could train while being on a service warfare officer, which I'm lucky that he was a good enough leader to recognize that people should follow their dreams, and as long as you hit your goals, you can do whatever you want outside of work. And so I was given that opportunity, and once I made the national team and went to World Championships in 2009 and won silver, I think I actually realized that the Olympics was where I wanted to go, and the only way to do that successfully was to get out of the Navy. So that was when it was rowing that really did it for me.
A Naval Academy classmate had recommended the book
Boys in the Boat.
Boys in the Boat.
Yeah.
I just read that like 6 months ago. I had a lot of respect for Crew before that, but reading that and just the way they explain the team dynamics and just how incredible sport it is, it's very inspiring.
Yeah, it's a great sport. I consider myself a veteran first and foremost, and I've learned a lot. I learned a lot as a veteran, as in my Navy experience. I've also learned a lot through rowing. Yeah, rowing's a pretty special sport, and a lot of lessons learned from that part of my life.
And when you did get out and you were going to go into rowing full time, how did you think about like reserves?
Good question.
Yeah.
So I loved serving, and I really enjoyed my time in the Navy, mainly because I really enjoyed the people and the leadership problems. It was, developing common purpose in the military is not a hard thing. Like, it's there. Everybody's there for each other. And I really enjoyed it. I love driving the ship, actually. I grew to like it a lot. And I enjoyed being a SWO in a lot of ways. But when it came down to, okay, I'm going to train for the Olympics, like, I didn't want any distractions. And I didn't want the possibility of getting pulled away from that. And so I decided not to join the reserves because of that.
I imagine because I just think of my experience at business school and how that was a nice way to decompress from the military and just kind of acclimate myself to civilian life. And so even though your experience with rowing wasn't like a typical job, I imagine that was like a decent way to unwind and kind of get your bearings and just decompress.
It was great. It was also a great, all those things. Yeah. It was also a really good time to learn more about myself. Yeah. It was very introspective. Yeah. Right? Because, although rowing is one of the ultimate team sports. You and the other person or the other 3 people or the other 7 people in the boat, you have no choice but to do everything exactly the same and work in unison. With that said, you really have to figure out your own demons and how to really push it to the next level. And training for the Olympics was the highest level, and so I learned a lot about myself just in terms of my own breaking points. Yeah. How to break through those barriers. How to even figure out what's important to me, which I think is most important in a job transition. Yeah. I think what I've seen a lot of veterans go to is, I want to be this role. Yeah. I want to do this thing. And my first question is, okay, well, tell me what that means. What does doing that thing mean for your day-to-day? Yeah. And I think what I ultimately find out most of the time is that they really care about a few very special things. Mm-hmm. And it just so happens they think that role will give them those things. Yeah. But I would argue that most veterans don't know enough about the civilian world to really make that assessment. Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's very accurate. It was for me in particular, and it is interesting because it's almost like you're teasing out of the person, what are the needs that you're trying to meet? I get that you want this role, but what is that doing for you? Yes. And there's so many different strategies to meet that need that doesn't necessarily revolve around whatever job that they probably heard about through a friend or through just random pieces of data. Right. Yeah. So how did you make the break from row? At what point did you say, I'm gonna to move on past rowing? Yeah. So so when I got cut from the Olympic team, I knew I was finished. Yeah. I was cut on April 13th, 2012, and I was the last cut, so I was the 5th guy. And, I had a decision not right then, but I had to make a decision pretty quickly as to whether I wanted to continue to go for the next cycle, the next Olympic cycle, which ended yesterday. Wow. And so I knew that, my wife and I had been away from each other for a long time because of the Navy and rowing. I knew that I couldn't really start a career if I was still rowing. I could not do that. I had to commit fully to it. And I was done with that part of my life. So I knew pretty much right away that I was going to transition. The next question was to what? Yeah. So. And had you,
I mean, it sounds like you were all in on rowing. I'm just wondering if there was like any exploration during those 2 years. Was it kind of like
there
2
was.
years? Okay, it was.
Yeah, so I actually thought I would be a teacher and a rowing coach.
Oh, because you founded the U.S. Lightweight Rowing Association along the way. Too, right?
Which we did after the Olympics in 2012. We did it in the fall of 2012, beginning of 2013, and we're still running that. The training for the Olympics is not all roses. It's hard in that there's not a lot of support for some sports, and rowing is one of them. We're actually severely underfunded compared to a lot of our competitors. And, there were a lot of times when I slept on couches and, if my wife wasn't working, I would have had to figure out how to get money somehow because the Olympic Committee does not give athletes very much money. Even the best athletes who win gold medals at the Olympics, which the women's U.S. rowing 8 just won their 3rd consecutive Olympics. At most, they'll get maybe $2,000 a month to live. And then you have to live in Princeton, New Jersey, which is pretty high cost of living. So you're not crushing it in any way. And stuff. Yeah.
And so then leading into Pinterest then, how did you start to hone in on technology?
Yeah.
And how was it the draw of technology, or was it closing doors on other things, or what funneled you in that way?
Yeah, so there's a number of variables when looking for a job. There's, the actual industry, the size of the company, the people at the company, the culture, if you will, the location of the company.
Yeah.
Location was guaranteed. Like, I was going to be in the Bay Area, so that was one thing I didn't have to think about. My wife was going to graduate school here, and I didn't have to think about going anywhere else, so that was good. So then what I did was I asked a bunch of people those questions about, what do you do? Why do you do it? What do you like? What do you don't like? And I talked to a few people in tech, and I really enjoyed what they had to say. And some of the themes that came out in all my conversations within tech and outside are, I learned what was important to me, which was I really wanted to work in a meritocracy.
Yeah.
I wanted to work in a fast-growing company because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do because last time I worked in the civilian world, I was in high school.
Yeah.
And so, a lot had changed. I knew I wanted to work with really smart people, with A players, if you will. And I wanted to work in a place where there was great leadership.
Yeah.
Because for me, I actually think the only way to grow a company is to develop people. You grow people, and people build the company.
Yeah.
And I really wanted to be in a place where that was believed and executed well. And I got lucky that I was introduced to a guy named Don Fall, who was the head of operations at Pinterest at the time I was transitioning. And through my conversations with him, I really enjoyed my conversations with him, and I learned that Pinterest overall met those different needs.
Yeah.
And so he was building out a small customer support team. Pinterest was about 70 people. Well, when I started talking to them, there were about 40, 50 people. And the customer support team was 4 people maybe. And so I applied to do customer support tickets. That's what I applied to do, knowing that if it was a fast-growing company and I did well, I can create my own opportunities for myself.
Oh, man, that's so smart. It's like it's that rocket ship analogy.
Yes.
You get on a rocket ship, you're a known commodity, and you can be the first person to switch into new roles as they emerge.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I got really lucky that Don convinced people that they should give me a shot. He had to fight for it. It's not easy. Yeah. And I also got really lucky that I think I really put that decision to test, or those criteria to test, when I when I got a job offer from Google about 3 days, within 3 days of my Pinterest offer.
Wow.
So I had 2 competing offers from very different companies.
Yeah.
Here's this beta bet that, that's 70 people. It's a complete mess. I mean, so many things were just unstructured and nascent at Pinterest. And here's this giant behemoth that is a great job, great, decent money right off the bat, and a bunch of infrastructure to teach you a lot of things. Pick one.
Yeah.
And I chose Pinterest because of those criteria. The people were amazing. The diversity of thought, the diversity of backgrounds, just a caliber. The leadership was awesome.
How did you? So I think from my perspective, it's pretty extraordinary to go essentially directly from the military and have options at Pinterest and Google. My understanding is that most people that would go into that have gone through either another organization first or through a graduate school program.
Like an MBA. Yeah.
So I'm wondering what advice you would have for people wanting to try and make that direct transition, or how you prepared for the interview, or what do you think made the difference?
Yeah, so I think, three pieces of advice. One is, when preparing for the interview, study. Like it was a pro board.
Yeah.
You know, get smart on their business, get smart on their product.
Yeah.
With that said, be humble and acknowledge that you have a lot to learn. But you have to study. I read the book How to Get Hired at Google.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, which seems very corny and cheesy, but they asked me how many ping pong balls you can fit in a 747, and I, gave the structured, to be honest, kind of useless answer that they bought, and those questions are shown to not be very effective in interviewing, but I knew they were going to ask it, and I knocked it out of the park because I had studied for it.
Yeah.
Second piece of advice is don't be bold in introducing yourself. I think that was one of the hardest things for me as a vet. The Navy doesn't really teach you to reach out to people you don't know.
Yeah.
Or the military doesn't. And so cold calling, networking, that stuff's really important.
Yeah.
And the best advice I got was from a mentor of mine. He goes, because I told him that I was kind of worried about this. Well, what if they don't answer me? Or what if they say no, or they think I'm crazy? And he goes, well, what's the worst thing going to happen? You're going to see them in a football game, and you're going to hate them, and they're not going to know who you are. So the worst thing that can happen is nothing.
Yeah.
You have nothing to lose. Reach out to them. And so I cold emailed a lot of people. And the last thing, which I think...
Just out of curiosity, because I've done a lot of cold emailing, from sales, business development, fundraising, a lot of that. I'm curious, what was your sense of hit rate? For every 10 or 100 emails you sent out, what was the response rate?
I don't remember.
Yeah.
I think it was pretty high, though. I was pretty targeted.
Yeah.
I would reach out to... So I basically had two... So it was all Service Academy guys.
Yep.
So we already had something in common. And from my experience, most Service Academy alumni want to help other Service Academy alumni.
Yeah.
So I think that was one thing. Two, I went high and low.
Yeah.
So I went for the COOs and the CEOs, which my hit rate was probably a little lower.
Yeah.
And I went for the guys that were, I was 05, so the 03s, the 02s.
Yeah.
And they definitely know your pain. Mm-hmm. So they were pretty willing to write back.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
And then the third piece of advice I would give, and I think this is unique, this is kind of to your question of how did I do this without going to business school or doing another job first? I took a step back in my career, and it was a risk. It was humbling being a 30-year-old who had trained for the Olympics, was a navigator on a warship, and had a ton of responsibility. It was humbling to sit next to 23, 24-year-olds and do customer support tickets and help grandmas get back into their Pinterest account. And I did that for 3 months.
Wow.
And I knew that it was a risk, but I also knew that I believed in the leaders in the company. The people were good. The Pinterest already had product market fit. Mm-hmm. And so I just tried to come in and honestly do more at higher quality than all the 23-year-olds.
Yeah.
That was my only...
Yeah.
I was these guys haven't trained for the Olympics. They haven't been on a ship. I can outwork. I'm pretty sure I can, at least try to outdo them, and that was my goal. And it didn't always work. We hire really smart, talented people, but... so I'd say that was a piece of advice for someone coming in who has not done the traditional, MBA prior experience route.
Yeah.
Is I had to take a step back.
It's it's incredible though that rolling your sleeve up and essentially saying I'm going to clean the toilets if I have to.
So
I imagine that goes a long way to just showing motivation and drive. And it worked because you had talked about you targeted meritocracy. So that might not be the right strategy for something that's more hierarchical, but knowing look, if this organization values a strong work ethic, I know I can knock this out of the park.
And I don't think I thought this at the time, but what I realized as I moved into management at Pinterest and have managed 3 different teams, that grunt work, if you will, did a few things. One, it gave me a ton of street cred, right, with my team, which goes a long way. 2, it gave me a ton of empathy, which is also
what it's like to be in those seats.
I know what it's like, and you can leverage that 2 ways. One, I do have empathy for my team. I understand how hard their job is, and 2, I understand how hard their job is and what it's like. So if they complain to me, I'm like, listen, I completely get it, but here's the problem we have to solve. You know? So I can challenge them back, right? With a little bit of foundation to stand on.
I love that. And so now that you went from community operation or almost like customer support to the community operations manager.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering. We talked about this right before we started recording, but what have you found is the difference between military leadership and leadership within tech?
Yeah, it's so it's interesting. I think that at a high level, not much is different, right? I view my job as studying the vision and empowering people, right? And I think that is no different than what I did as a Divo, right? We have in-serve in 6 months, right? There's your vision, right? Or we're going to deployment, you know, and then empowering is, okay, where's the inspection checklist? Or, okay, you run all the maintenance. I don't need to be on top of it because you're on top of it, and empowering people in that way, or being on somebody's butt about, something the XO is, cranky about. So at a high level, that's, that's one thing. It's all the same. I think tactically, so there's a lack of structure in tech, right? At a company that's growing that was 70 people 4 years ago and is now 1,000.
Unreal.
Right? And so, there was no maintenance manual. There was no inspection checklist. There was no real way to hold people accountable, right? And so the lack of structure, it gave you freedom to build what you want and optimize towards success, as you saw it as a leader, which is a little bit different than the military. Success is pretty much defined for you.
Yeah.
So I think that was one of the big differences. Let me think. Oh, another one is you can choose who works for you. And I think that's really important, and something firing people is really hard, and you kind of fire people in the military, but not really, and hiring is really hard. That's something I didn't have to do as a leader in the military. And so those are 2 different muscles that you really have to figure out. And then I think the cross-functional work is very, very different. And so there's leadership is managing your team, that's one, but you also have to lead across the company, horizontally.
Yeah.
And so when you're building products for consumers and you're on customer support or sales, which is my background, and you're the tip of the spear.
Yeah.
You're talking to users, whether it's someone who wants to spend money on ads or someone who's using Pinterest to discover things they love and do those things. You have to figure out how to, one, influence the product team to help create the best product for Pinterest, while 2, trusting product enough that they're not going to build everything to solve all your problems and help your team understand that. I never had to do that in the military.
Yeah.
So that's a little different.
I've always viewed that any customer facing role is such a vital piece because you're right, you're the main voice of feedback for the engineers on what to build, and they can't always build everything, so you also have to be the buffer for the company of helping people when the product doesn't fit all of their needs or use cases.
100%, and you can't be the damn XO to your team either. You can't say, well, product's not building that, they're screwing us.
Yeah.
You have to really push your team to understand that, had to have empathy for product, which honestly, like, I messed that up a million times over.
Yeah.
I don't know, I just didn't have empathy for them. And then after about a year of like leading the customer support team, I finally figured it out. And I was like, well, they do have the same goal we have, but they're just, they're solving for different problems sometimes. And it was a tough lesson for me to learn.
And when you were community operations manager, what was your day-to-day life like in terms of hours, travel, types of people you were working with?
Yeah, I mean, taking me back.
Back in the day.
When I was community ops manager, I managed 2 different teams over 2 different time spans. The first year was the customer support team, and the second year was our spam operations team.
Okay.
Which is a little bit of a different problem. So I'll talk about customer support. Customer support, I probably spent my day focused on 3 different things. One was leading my team, right? Setting goals, doing one-on-ones, working on career development, all of those things.
How many people were in the team?
So we started with 2, and we built it up to 7.
Okay, so you did a lot of hiring.
A lot of hiring.
Yeah.
So that brings me to the next one, which is like team building, right? Whether it was building out expectations for different levels, or hiring people, or doing counseling, and things like that. The team building part of it was a big part. And the third part was engaging with product and engineering. And so, which was fun. And I think that's where I probably learned the most. I had an operations background. I could think through problems in an operations way, in a systematic way. But communicating back and forth with product was a challenge for me, a newer challenge. It's a little bit different than talking with, engineers in the engineering space of a frigate. Yeah. Right? Like everything's already defined, everything's already built. Yep. You're just like monitoring systems and making sure things are running. Here, you're building everything brand new. Yeah. Which brings into account, and you have a customer. Yeah. Which brings into account a few different problems.
What about on the team building side? I've always found it interesting that my experience in the military was with leadership, this whole sense of fraternization and this heavy line between the people you lead and how you react. Yeah. And then so much for me, at least on the civilian side, is like you want to have, it's not, maybe not friendship, but you want to have a good rapport. You're going out to dinner, you're doing team events. I'm wondering how you've navigated that or how that's different for you.
Yeah, it's funny. My father owns a seafood business in Southeast Virginia. I was the first person on my dad's side to ever get a college degree. I come from a very blue-collar family. Yep. And I always felt out of place in the wardroom. Yeah. I never felt comfortable there. Yeah. I actually really enjoyed talking to chiefs. Like, part of me thought I should have been a chief. And so I don't know if I was ever really good at the delineation of officer and enlist. I knew that there was a good reason for it. I think it took me a long time to learn that as a junior officer, and I get it. But at the same time, it wasn't natural for me. Yeah. So when I came to tech, and there was this natural open space to communicate and be one with your team, I think it definitely fit into my personality a bit more. Yeah. And so the way I approach it is, again, vision and empowerment. Mm-hmm. I'm a big believer of servant leadership. I'm here to help you guys hit your goals. Yeah. Because honestly, that's the only way I hit my goals. Yeah. My goals are their goals. Yeah. I don't control very much. So, and that's, I think that's one reason why, building rapport, building trust, is super important. And if you're going to come to work and spend a bunch of time with people and, to solve really hard problems and probably have some stress in your life, you might as well have fun. Yeah. So, I think all of those things, it wasn't that hard of a transition for me. I think it more fit my natural state. Yep.
And then what about for when you went in on more in the sales capacity, managing the growth sales? Yeah. What was that like? What was the lifestyle like and kind of the day-to-day like there?
Yeah. So I worked on spam for, a little over a year, and my goal there in doing the spam job was to work with engineers. And I wanted to get that experience and I really enjoyed it. And I would say that is in my time with Pinner Ops, with the community support team, customer support team, was very internally focused as well, right? Talk to product. I would say the biggest difference between sales and my previous life in customer support and spam was it's outward facing, way more outward facing. So we are going to market with a set of solutions to help advertisers solve their marketing objectives. Mm-hmm. And in that, I have to, really be thoughtful about who I'm talking to and how I'm talking to them, and a little bit more so than I did when we were, a 70 to 250 person startup.
Yeah.
You can kind of just go knock down walls and doors and, go rogue, if you would. It doesn't work as well in advertising. So I found that out the hard way.
Yeah.
So I would say that's one of the biggest differences is I'm in market, right, in my day-to-day, a lot more. The leadership's different. We have very objective goals in sales, which I love, and it fits my personality really well. And I have a really good team of 6 sellers, and each one of them does their job differently. And so I have to figure out how to objectively measure them while letting them run their own race.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is a challenge. Part of me wants to say, well, I would do it this way, but that's not my job. Mm-hmm. I hire them to do their job. They're probably better than I am.
Yeah. And
so it's a lot of, okay, well, walk me through your thought process, and I learn a ton from them. Mm-hmm. And then, can we get that everybody else has their own ideas, so get them together to share. So my day-to-day, the biggest change is I'm in market more.
I think that I very recently learned that as well, which is I have my approach, but people are so different. So it's not about teaching someone to do it my way. It's being able to choreograph that objective and support them in whatever approach is best for them.
Yeah.
What about weekends, working late? What's the lifestyle component?
Good question. So I have an 8-month-old, which definitely changes things. So before my daughter was born, I would, I'd be at Pinterest from probably 6:30 a.m. till 7 p.m.
Well,
now I got here at 6:30, so I get a parking spot, and I worked out for an hour.
Yeah.
And I would have some breakfast, and then I would work all day, and I'd probably get some dinner around 6:30, and then I'd go home.
Yeah.
The day-to-day changes so much that it's hard to get into the tactical, what do I do all day? Mm-hmm. I would say in sales, a few things. One, I'm on the phone or in person with clients a lot. Mm. I sit down with product and relay the problems our advertisers are having and try to then communicate what they're working on back to my team.
Yeah.
A lot of sales strategy and sales leadership type stuff. So building out comp plans, building out, are we going to verticalize? What's the team structure? What's the optimal, account manager to account executive ratio? Tactical questions like that. Those are the things I would do in this job day to day. Now, after my daughter was born, I get on the train at 7:30. I get in the office at 8:30. I am very efficient with my time until 5:15, and I walk to the train, and I get home at 6:30. I immediately go into dad mode, which is it's food time.
Yeah.
So I'm usually cooking food for my wife and I while my wife's feeding Addison, our daughter, or vice versa. Then bath time at 7, and then it's story time at 7:30.
Yeah.
And then at around 8 o'clock, I will get back on my computer and answer emails for probably an hour or an hour and a half.
Well.
So definitely more concentrated in work after I had a kid.
Yeah. I know we're running short on time. I'm wondering if someone is on active duty and they're thinking of getting out, what other advice would you have for them? Whether it's a resource or whether it's just anything that you would want them to know.
Yeah, I think the first thing is be open to the fact that you don't know what you don't know, and so and with that, be really willing to reach out and and ask people, what they do and why they do it and what they like and what they don't like. Because my push for veterans is try to figure out what's important to you, not declare a role that you want to do.
Yeah.
Right? I think that's really hard because the hardest thing for me in transitioning was the lack of structure in a lot of things, but the hardest thing for me was in career development.
Yeah.
Like, I knew in 20 years, in 17 years after being an ensign, I would be CEO of a ship, right? Like, not guaranteed, but I knew exactly what I needed to do to get there.
Yeah.
And I get here, and I'm doing customer support tickets. I'm like, when can I manage? And they're like, I don't know. I don't even know what that means here.
Yeah.
And then, well, what's after the community ops team? Well, we don't know what teams we're building, and Pinterest might stop growing, and like, there's all these question marks. And so, be open to just learning and figure out what's important to you, and then try to find the company that's perfect for you. Other advice I got was don't settle, which is also really hard advice because the job search can take a long time. So for me, I started in April of 2012. I got an offer in September. So it took a while. And I said no to a few places before I said yes to Pinterest because I had someone that told me don't settle.
Yeah.
Which is really tough, and it really depends on your situation. I was willing to take on some risk, going to a small company. I didn't have kids. My wife was going to business school, so we were already poor. It didn't really matter.
Drop in the bucket.
Yeah. So I got lucky in that I didn't settle and I found this place.
Yeah, I think that's like really good advice across the board because it does take a long time to figure out what you want to do. I liked what you talked about with just knowing yourself and knowing what you wanted. And I could imagine, for myself in that position, I can imagine like May, June, like you're starting to look at your bank account going down and starting to feel like, well, I should just take it. And that fear could drive you to choose something before you find what's really right for you.
Yeah, and I think you optimize for the wrong thing in that situation, which is really, really hard.
Yeah.
And again, depending on your situation, like if I had kids, that might have been a very different situation.
Yeah.
I probably went out to Google.
Yeah.
To be honest.
And it's interesting too, because having chosen what at the time was a startup, you what at the time was a startup, you're introducing even more ambiguity around career progression. Like you were talking about, like there literally is no way to gauge how long until you're a manager. Where at Google, it's probably much more defined in terms of, in general, 2 or 3 years to this position.
Yeah.
But for people to know if they go to a company that's, I don't know, sub 500 people, it's going to be a little bit more figure out as you go.
100% it is. Yeah. And it took me a while to become okay with that.
Yeah.
There's also opportunity in that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Because there's nothing that says you have to take this long to get to this level, right?
Yeah.
And so if you crush it and you work in a meritocracy, there's an opportunity to leapfrog and create an uncompetitive advantage for yourself.
Yeah. Well, I think that's all the time we have, man.
Cool.
But thank you for the advice on all this.
Of course. Thank you for chatting with me, and thanks for doing this. This is awesome.
Surface.
All right, thanks for listening. On Mondays, I'll be back with new original episodes. Let me know what you think about this. If it's distracting, if you've already listened to these episodes and it's an annoyance to get these rebroadcasts, I'll cut back on it. But I'll try and do 3 or 4 of them and just scroll through the archives, the ones that stand out to me as memorable, the ones that I particularly enjoyed. And if you haven't listened to it and you're enjoying having this extra opportunity during the week to explore older episodes, let me know and I'll continue that. Have a great week. I'll be back Monday with a new episode. Bye.